Alright, me. It is middle of June, and I've just finished reading Jerry Spinelli's Maniac, Magee. Um, this was published in, if I can find it quickly, 1990. Jerry Spinelli, obviously very, not only just popular, but also pretty prolific kind of early reader type books. A lot of like when I think back to it, at least for people that I grew up with, Jerry Spinelli was a lot of kids like kind of like first like big chapter type book. Maniac is no different in terms of that, right? It's a chapter book, but it's certainly meant for like third, fourth grade level at best. So yeah. Boy, what a silly book. It was a book that I could not stop laughing, but not for the right reasons, I don't think. It is just such an interesting book in terms of everything. Because like the plot is that you have Maniac, whose name is Jeffrey, who is legitimately just has like legitimately tragic backstory, right? Of where we find out pretty quickly that both of his parents died at a very young age, when he was at a very young age, like he was 3 years old. They died in an accident in their hometown. He was then shipped across the state to go live with an aunt and uncle that hated each other, but they, as this described directly, were Catholic, so they couldn't get divorced even though they hated each other. And so he runs away from that back to his hometown across the state, and then is living as a homeless child. And in his events as living as a homeless child, he solves racism. And it's a wild thing. But because the way it kind of ends up breaking down, right, is that because of this backstory and who he is, right, he has this look on life about just living and just doing whatever, right? And because of that, he doesn't really have any fears until the very end. But because he has no fears, therefore he just gets to do everything that everyone else, as a young child, especially in the pre-internet age, would be terrified of, right? The neighbors' houses that you're not supposed to go in their yards, going to the opposite side of town, whatever. And through his adventures, right, he gets this nickname Maniac Magee just because he's this super athletic kid that also seems to have no fear, but also he's just like a good kid, so like everyone likes him. And then the big thing is, right, throughout all of it, is that he's constantly running away from people that are trying to show him love because it doesn't feel like a home to him, right? And he finds it very difficult to be settled in one place because of this constant fear, I guess. And so he kind of bounces. He lives in a couple different houses, but the majority of the time he's living is spent either in basically a closet at a local park that he lives in, or in the lean-to of a barn, effectively, at a local zoo. So, interesting. But really it's a story of learning to accept yourself, learning to accept others, and that even though things are never going to be perfect, that you have to be willing to accept them. And throughout all of this learning and Maniac Magee growing up and learning this, he solves racism in this town. Because what ends up happening, right, is that he basically spends significant time with 4 different families on each side of town, right? He has 2 on the east end, which is considered the black end, and then 2 on the west end, which is considered the white end of town. And what he sees is that on each side, there is one family on each side that is completely willing and accepting of the other, and willingness to support either the blacks supporting the whites, the whites supporting the blacks, right? But then he also then sees one family on each side that views the other side as the other, right? As the outsider, as the one that should not be liked in any sort of way, right? And what eventually happens is that he kind of introduces some of these people to each other, and the way this ends is that the group of boys, of children coming from the white family that hates black people, they're wild and they're reckless, and they are playing on the tracks that that Maniac Magee's parents died on, and one of the boys tries to get Maniac Magee to save the other boy who's on the tracks, and Magee walks away because he can't do it, right? Like, this is the one thing that he fears, is these tracks, right? And the person who ends up saving the boy that's stuck on the tracks is Mars Bars Thompson, who is from the black family that hates white people, right? And he goes on the tracks, gets the boy, brings him back, but now the little I think it's Lester is the one that gets stuck out there, won't let go of Mars Bars, so Mars Bars takes him home. So now you have the little white boy who hated anyone who was black now in the home of what was generally considered the black family that hated anyone who was white. And then everything is saved and everything works out and it's all fine and it's all good and nothing bad ever happens again. I don't know, dude. It's just such a wild thing. It's certainly interesting, but boy, oh boy, what a time. But yeah, that's Maniac Magee by Jerry Spinelli. What I don't think was supposed to be a funny book, to me has become very funny, because there's no reasoning, and everything just kind of happens because it happens, and then everything is saved and everything's good in the end, and nothing's really solved, it just is. So, but yeah, that's Maniac Magee.